And good morning, everyone. We are back here at 8:07 a.m., and that means it's a Friday, and we have Scott Braddock on line one. Scott is with the quorumreport.com. Good morning, Scott Braddock.
Good morning, Dave.
How are you doing this morning, Scott?
I'm just doing great. I'm a little stuffed up from allergies, but it's that time of year.
Yeah,
what can you do?
I agree.
What can you do? I feel way better than I sound.
You're stuck in Austin. What do they have? The cedar fever. That's what they call it down there.
Cedar fever and ragweed.
Yeah.
My father, of course, I grew up on a farm in southeast Texas, Wharton County, and the ragweed, when it would come in, it would just be terrible. Because he had to work outside all day, of course, on the farm, and his face would just be completely red. So at least I don't have to do that.
Well, I'll tell you, I never knew that one cedar tree could dump so much pollen, but you go over there and
terrible.
you barely bump up against it, and it's like this cloud of yellow just pours out of it.
Well, it's really terrible, and of course, as you know, allergies are the only thing that one of the only things that it gets worse the more you're exposed to it. Instead of the other way around, you don't get immune to it; it just gets worse. So the longer people are in Austin, the worse off they are. So I just suggest nobody move here.
I was going to say, Scott, it's just you're allergic to Austin. You're going to have to move somewhere else in Texas.
I'm like the opposite of the Chamber of Commerce around here. I say build a wall around Austin. Thanks.
Or cut down all the cedar trees, but then there's a lot of people that I think Austin tried to make a law against cutting down trees at all, so I don't know if that would work.
Yeah, that was a big fight in 2017.
So I'm going to start with something that wasn't on your list just because it's a rumor that I've heard, I think, multiple times before, but apparently Rick Perry's looking at stepping down.
Yeah, I had heard this over the last couple of weeks, and actually one of my sources in the Austin lobby, in the Austin swamp, if you want to say it that way, one of my sources had said that it had been rumored among those close to Perry for months that he was looking to step down in November. Now that's been reported by Politico, publicly. They put out a headline like that last night. And Perry, is said to be kind of miserable in Washington. I think, the president called on him to serve, and you don't say no when the president calls. But I think that he's done, a really good job of avoiding any sort of scandal. You don't hear about Perry, caught up in any sort of grifting or any of the sort of stuff that led to the downfall of some of the other members of the Trump administration. So he's kind of been, minding his own, and I'm told that he's got an 800 square foot apartment in Washington that he kind of goes to each night and doesn't really mess around at night like some people do, go around, drinking and carousing with people. Perry doesn't do that. He's on his Facebook page quite a bit, posting that he's usually in Round Top, Texas, out near Brenham in Washington County. That's where he'd rather be, and I think that's probably where he'd rather be permanently.
Well, and I'll ask you this, too. I don't think he originally wanted to be in the, energy sector. He wanted to be in veteran affairs from the rumors that were out there, and so I'm not sure that that's really where he wanted to be anyway.
Yeah, it's a good point, and of course, you can't skip the irony. We can't talk about this without mentioning the fact that you remember when Perry was running for president, and he was in that debate, and he was going to try to name 3 agencies that he would get rid of if he was president, and the one that he could not remember. Energy. That's the one that he ended up as the secretary of. Which you can't make that up. It's too good. The comedy writes itself around here, guys.
All right. Well, we'll jump over now. Greg Abbott. Now he came out with it. Was, I don't know. Did he release that video on Facebook, or I think I saw it on Twitter or something?
One of those Twitter.
But he released a video that essentially told Austin to get your stuff together with this homeless problem, or I'm going to intervene.
Yeah. Well, it's a serious thing here in Austin. You have a situation where the city council went ahead with something that wasn't quite cooked just yet. They rolled out this camping policy for homeless folks in Austin, and of course, I think everyone around here wants a compassionate response to our homeless issue. We're certainly not the only city that that has that problem. But look at the way that the homeless situation's been handled on the West Coast in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. It hasn't gone well. Austin's right now sort of patterning its policy after that. And the governor this week in that video you're talking about, and in a statement to us in the press, he said that he would unleash, quote unquote, the power of state government to step in and do something about all this. Maybe more political posturing than anything. You may have seen where the president, President Trump has also been talking about the response to some of the homeless problems in different cities around the country, and that he doesn't agree with the way it's being handled. But this is a real mess here. The mayor, Steve Adler, is a liberal Democrat, and he had responded to Abbott's, his comments that the state would step in. Adler said he took it as a sign that the governor is ready to support the city of Austin. So they're having a little back and forth about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the best case scenario for the city, in other words, the city itself is looking for a way out, and they can't figure out a way out. And I think their best case scenario would be for the governor and the state of Texas to step in and give them a way out. And then they can blame Governor Abbott instead of blaming the city council for being heartless.
And has been a case with city council in Austin, and I'm a resident of the city. I don't cover City Hall. I focus on state government, but I can tell you, as somebody who lives in Austin, it has been the case especially over the past few years since the council was changed from at-large elections to district elections, which I agree with that, by the way, as far as just a matter of representation.
Because I remember hearing about at-large, and I thought they still had that, and I'm like, this is how they're going to – I mean, you literally have no representation for those, let's say, in a more conservative district.
Yeah, basically what ended up happening in Austin, because all the council members were elected at large, a few years ago, you basically had a council that was sort of center-left. But what you have now is you do have, the opportunity for a conservative to be elected, but most of the rest are pretty far-left liberals. I do think it has moved the council further to the left to have it constituted that way, even if it is more representative of the city. I mean, Austin is a liberal place. But ever since they went to the single-member districts, it seems like the council is always in a rush to do things rather than take its time on this homeless thing. They went ahead with sort of like half of what their policy was supposed to be. They didn't have the back half of it done. They didn't have certain studies done, and the staff at the city hall was, working on some other proposals that were maybe going to be rolled out this fall to deal with this, and some of the further left members of the council said, "We're not waiting. We're going to go ahead with this," and you've seen the results. It would probably be better to work with their staff and get this all worked out before they rolled out something that has become something that even the President of the United States has tweeted about and said that it's not acceptable.
Yeah. So Representative Thornberry has said he's not going to run for re-election. Do you see any ripple effect from that? I mean, we're having that all over Texas to some extent, and even all over the nation. Sure. If you count the last 2 years, 2 years ago, and this one, you're talking about just a huge exit from the Republican Party. How do you think that's going to affect things?
At some point, this whole idea of a Texodus becomes sort of a rallying point for Democrats, and I think it has over the last couple of months. These Republicans from Texas keep resigning. Of course, we talked on KFYO about the fact that, the reason that a lot of these guys are stepping aside is, one, for a guy like Thornberry, he's being term limited out of his leadership position on the main committee that he serves on, Armed Services, which is a very important committee. He's almost, a friend pointed out to me, that we have had in Texas with Thornberry. Basically, the way John McCain was sort of the guy for military stuff in the U.S. Senate, Thornberry was the guy for military stuff in the U.S. House, and has been, somebody taking care of all the military bases in Texas, all the veterans in Texas, and also private sector jobs. I mean, people in Fort Worth appreciate the fact that Thornberry was there to sort of direct contracts to Lockheed Martin and the Bell helicopter operations in Tarrant County. So that's all very important, and who knows, who will fill that role going forward. But I think, some of these Republicans maybe not comfortable, operating in the environment in which President Trump is the president, and they're being asked about the things that he says all the time. I think it's kind of like Ted Cruz said the other day when he was being interviewed in Austin, had said, look, I agree with a lot of the policies of President Trump, but, man, I hear from Texans all the time, I wish they could just take his phone away from him so they wouldn't be tweeting this nonsense all the time. That's what I don't want to have to answer for. And I think a lot of these sort of Republican classic-style sort of Republicans, they are also tired of answering those questions. So, yeah, I think there'll be some dominoes to fall. Of course, you've got state representatives and state senators who might want to run for Congress. We do know some of their names as far as those who might be interested in it, although there is some time. As you know, the filing deadline for Texas office holders, candidates, is coming up in December. I believe it's December 9th.
That'll be interesting to see what we see between now and then.
Right, so folks have time to figure out what they want to run for. And, of course, if they're going to take a shot at an open seat in Congress, if it's a state rep, they have to quit their job. If it's a state senator, they may not have to because they may have just run for re-election. They may get a free shot at it.
Yeah. All right, well, we're running out of time, but I just want to mention President Trump is coming to Dallas, and you're one of the things you brought up is looking at who goes and who doesn't go to the event.
It'll be interesting. I think the statewide Republicans are still trying to buddy themselves up as much as they can to President Trump. You see that from John Cornyn and Lieutenant Governor Patrick and some others. But for some of those state House members, particularly those from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where Trump is going to be on the 17th, they may not want to be there because I don't think that their message in their campaigns is going to be that they are loyal to and part of the party of President Trump. I think that their message is going to be, look at what I did for you at the state level. During the session, they tried to focus on property taxes and school finance. They don't really want to get into all of these sort of ugly, nasty arguments about whether people support President Trump or not. And they do have an out for not being at the rally if they don't want to be. There is the GOP Republican, there's the House Republican caucus meeting is happening that same weekend in Austin, so they can say that was long planned before this rally was planned, and they've got to be at that instead for important business.
Yeah, and this is a huge election coming up, 2020. They could be redistricting during those who win that election.
Absolutely. And redistricting, which we'll talk a lot more here about on KFYO, is going to be almost the only issue they get to in the 2021 session of the legislature. Very important.
All right. Scott, thanks for coming on. I want to remind everyone that you are the editor of the Quorum Report at quorumreport.com. And is there any headline you want to throw out there from quorumreport.com?
Interesting. The business community in Texas is trying to figure out an immigration solution in the Trump era and trying to figure out what they can do. We've got a report from Houston there, which you can check out. A lot of the big business groups met yesterday for an all-day deal where they heard from Congressman Hurd and Congresswoman Fletcher here from Houston, and sort of talking about plotting out how they can try to figure out an immigration solution, but as you know, that's very thorny, especially right now with the kind of rhetoric being thrown out by the president. It's all at quorumreport.com, where you can sign up for our free email alerts at quorumreport.com.
All right, thanks, Scott. We'll talk to you next week.